By the time that gavel drops, you won't have a name left worth signing." He whispered it into the shell of her ear in the elevator, close enough that his breath stirred the fine hair at her temple. The smile was wide. He wanted her to feel the smile more than he wanted her to hear the words. Elena Voss did not turn her head. She did not blink. She shifted the weight of the worn leather briefcase on her shoulder and watched the numbers above the elevator door climb towards 7. He was so certain he had picked the right fight that he never once asked what was inside the briefcase she had been carrying every single day for the last 11 months. The elevator chimed. The doors opened onto the cold marble corridor of the Ellis County Courthouse, and James Voss walked out first, because James Voss always walked out first. He did not hold the door. He did not look back. His tailored charcoal suit was the exact color of the gunmetal finish on the railings, and he moved like a man arriving at a party he had personally paid for. Elena followed at her own pace. Her heels made a quiet sound on the polished stone. Her dress was simple, navy, the kind of dress a woman wears when she does not want to be remembered. Her dark hair was pulled back into a low knot. No jewelry, no wedding ring. She had stopped wearing the ring 11 months ago, the same morning she had started carrying the briefcase. A young woman with a stenography case stepped aside to let James pass, then looked at Elena and almost smiled. The smile died before it reached her mouth. Nobody smiled at the woman the entire courthouse had been told was the one who had ruined Mr. Voss's life. Halfway down the corridor, James stopped, spun on his heel, and grabbed the briefcase strap where it crossed her shoulder. He pulled. Hard. The briefcase slid. Elena caught it against her hip with a practiced hand before it could hit the marble. "You embarrass me in there today," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear. "And I will make sure you never see Chloe again. I don't care what I have to spend. I don't care who I have to pay. Are we clear?" It was not a question. She raised her eyes. For one long second, she looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a tumor. "We are clear," she said. He smiled again. He let the strap go. He walked away. 2 yards behind them, a bailiff in a crisp uniform had paused mid-stride. He was a broad man in his late 50s, gray at the temples, a small pin on his lapel that most people would have mistaken for a flag. He watched James Voss disappear around the corner. Then he watched Elena adjust her briefcase and walk steadily toward courtroom 4. The bailiff's mouth tightened. He did not say a word. He simply followed, one respectful pace behind her, all the way down the corridor. If you're already feeling the weight of what this woman is about to walk into, do me a favor right now. Tap that like button and subscribe, because by the end of part 1, you will not believe who she actually is. The morning had started at 6 a.m. James had stood in their kitchen with his coffee in one hand and the divorce petition in the other, and he had read 3 paragraphs of it aloud in a voice loud enough to wake their 15-year-old daughter upstairs. "Respondent has been a non-contributing partner to the marital estate for the entirety of the marriage," he read. He set the papers down on the granite island. He picked up the coffee. He took a long sip. "I mean, Elena, come on. Non-contributing. Even your lawyer agrees with my lawyer. You've been a passenger in this marriage for 16 years. Elena stood at the sink, rinsing a plate. She did not respond. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She turned the water off. She dried her hands on the towel that hung from the oven handle. She turned to face him. "I'm looking, James." He smiled his slow smile. He set the coffee cup down. Then he picked up the petition and threw it. The paper hit her in the chest and fell to the kitchen floor in a loose white fan. A single sheet slid under the refrigerator. "Pick it up," he said. "No." The slow smile tightened. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides. He was 6'2". She was 5'6". He stopped inches from her, the tip of his Italian leather shoe almost touching her plain black pump, and he leaned down until his face was level with hers. "Pick it up." "James." Her voice was completely level. "I have spent 16 years picking things up off floors in this house. I am done. If you want it on the counter, you put it on the counter. His hand moved before she finished the sentence. He didn't slap her. He grabbed her jaw. His thumb pressed into the soft hollow beneath her cheekbone, and his fingers dug into the side of her throat, not hard enough to leave a bruise where anyone would see it, but hard enough to tilt her head back against the edge of the counter. "You are going to walk into that courtroom today," he said, "and you are going to agree to every single thing Richard asks of you. The house is mine. The firm shares are mine. Chloe is mine. You walk away with the car and a suitcase. Because if you don't—" A small sound from the stairs. His hand dropped. His whole body recalibrated. The smile slid back onto his face like a mask being lowered. "Morning, sweetheart," he called up. Chloe Voss appeared at the top of the staircase in her school uniform, backpack over one shoulder, a piece of toast between her teeth. 15, tall like her father, but with her mother's quiet gray eyes. She looked from her father to her mother. The toast came out of her mouth. "Why is there paper all over the floor?" "Your mom dropped her file," James said smoothly. "Come down, kiddo. I'll drive you to school on my way to court." "Mom is driving me." "Mom has court too." "Mom is driving me." Elena smiled at her daughter. It was a small, real smile, the first one that had touched her face that morning. "I am driving you," she said. "Go get your shoes." Chloe's eyes flicked to her father. They held there for 1 second. Chloe had been watching her father for a long time. Chloe had been watching her father for longer than her father suspected. Then she turned and ran back upstairs. James waited until her bedroom door shut. "You're going to lose her too," he said under his breath. "I promise you that. The second this is over, I'm filing for full custody. And she's going to watch every single hearing, Elena, every single one. She's going to sit in that courtroom and listen to Richard destroy you in public, and then she's going to hear the judge agree. Do you understand what I am telling you?" Elena bent down. She picked up one single sheet of the petition. The first page, the caption page, the one with both their names on it. She folded it once. She folded it twice. She slid it into the inside pocket of her jacket, over her heart. "I understand you perfectly, James," she said. She left the rest of the papers on the floor. She went to get her briefcase. Chloe had not said a single word on the whole drive to school. She had stared out the passenger window and held her seatbelt with both hands. When Elena pulled up to the curb at Ellis Country Day School, Chloe did not move to get out. The engine idled. The radio was off. "Mom." "Yes." "He grabbed your face." Elena did not turn her head. She looked at the rear-view mirror. She looked at the bumper of the car ahead of them. She looked at her daughter's hands on the seatbelt. "I know." "You didn't do anything." "I know." "Why didn't you do anything?" Elena finally turned. "Because the man who grabs a woman's face in her own kitchen," she said, "is not the man who is going to be feared when this is over. The man who is going to be feared is the one who waits." Chloe stared at her. "Mom, who are you?" Elena reached across the console and brushed a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear, the first tremor in her hand that morning. She stilled it. "I am your mother," she said, "and after today, you are going to be very proud of me." "I'm already proud of you." "I know, baby, I know." Chloe got out. She walked halfway up the school steps, then she turned around and ran back to the car and banged on the window. Elena lowered it. "Mom, whatever you're about to do it hard." The window went back up. Chloe ran inside the school. Elena sat at the curb for exactly 30 more seconds, hands flat on the steering wheel, breathing slow through her nose. Then she put the car in drive. She had 36 minutes to get to Courtroom 4. She made it in 32. Courtroom 4 on the 7th floor of the Ellis County Courthouse was a wood-paneled rectangle that smelled like old paper and lemon polish, and something faintly metallic that court reporters swore was the smell of the recording equipment. The gallery held 40 seats. On this morning, 28 of them were full. James Voss had made sure of that. 4 rows behind the respondents' table, a cluster of men in suits Elena recognized from the country club stood talking in low voices. Business partners. Golf friends. Two of them were James's co-investors in the Voss Development Group. One of them, a blond, heavy-set man named Bentley Krause, had once told Elena at a Christmas party that women who raised children were doing the real work of civilization. He had then spent the next 2 hours talking about his boat. 2 rows behind the petitioner's table, Elena saw a woman she did not recognize. Late 20s, long red hair, a dark green dress that was 2 sizes too small for a courtroom. The woman was looking at James the way a woman looks at a husband, not a friend. James had not even had the decency to leave the girlfriend at home. Elena walked down the center aisle without looking at any of them. Her own attorney was already at the respondent's table. Harriet Moss was 62 years old, gray hair cut blunt at the jaw, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She was a competent divorce lawyer in the general sense that a good family medicine doctor is a competent surgeon. Elena had chosen her specifically because she was competent, because she was quiet, and because she was not the lawyer Elena would have chosen if Elena had wanted to win. Harriet stood up as Elena approached. "How are we doing, dear?" "We are doing," Elena said. "He's brought Blackwood." "I saw." "You don't seem as concerned as you should be." Elena set the briefcase down on the table. She did not open it. She pulled out the chair, and she sat. "I will be concerned when there is something to be concerned about, Harriet." Harriet looked at her for a beat too long. Then she sat down as well, and began shuffling through her own much smaller stack of papers, and she did not notice the way Elena's left hand rested flat across the top of the leather briefcase, palm down, fingers slightly spread, the way a pianist rests her hand on a closed lid before she lifts it. At the petitioner's table across the aisle, James was leaning over his attorney, murmuring something. The attorney laughed. Richard Blackwood was 51 years old, 6'4", silver-haired, with the kind of tan that comes from winter trips to places poor people cannot spell. He had gone to Yale for his undergrad and Columbia for his law degree. He had argued 3 cases before the state Supreme Court. He had never lost a divorce proceeding against a stay-at-home mother in his entire 23-year career, and the reason for that was not his legal skill, which was considerable, but his willingness to do to women in a courtroom what most lawyers were unwilling to do to anyone. He stood now, buttoning his jacket, and he looked across the aisle at Elena. He smiled. It was the same smile James had worn in the elevator. The door behind the bench opened and the bailiff stepped through. "All rise." The gallery stood. The attorney stood. Elena stood. The Honorable Gerald Harrison presiding. Judge Gerald Harrison was 68 years old. He had served on the Ellis County bench for 22 years. He was 3 months from retirement. He had known James Voss's father for 40 years. They had played golf together every Sunday morning at the Ellis Country Club until the elder Voss had died of a heart attack on the 9th hole 6 years ago, after which Gerald Harrison had given the eulogy. This was a fact that had been made known to Elena's attorney only after it was too late to file for recusal. Harriet had shrugged when she learned. "It's a small town, dear." Elena had not shrugged. Elena had said nothing at all. Judge Harrison climbed into his chair. He was a large man with a face that had settled into permanent disapproval. He did not look at Elena. He did not look at James. He looked at the stack of papers on his bench, and he sighed like a man who had a tea time at 1. "Be seated." The courtroom sat. Voss versus Voss. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Petition for division of marital assets. Petition for sole physical and legal custody of minor child, Chloe Margaret Voss. Our counsel ready. "Petitioner is ready, Your Honor," Blackwood said. His voice was oak and honey. "Respondent is ready, Your Honor," Harriet said. Her voice was paper. "Mr. Blackwood, proceed with your opening." Richard Blackwood stood. He did not move to the lectern. He walked out from behind his table and into the open space in front of the bench, and he turned so that his back was half to the judge and half to the gallery, because Richard Blackwood was a man who understood that a courtroom was a stage and that juries were not the only audience that mattered. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a simple case. My client, Mr. James Voss, is a self-made man. He built Voss Development Group from a single backhoe and a handshake loan into one of the largest commercial construction firms in this state. He employs 417 people. He pays over $2 million a year in taxes. He has been, for 16 years, the sole financial engine of the Voss family." He paused. He turned slowly, and his eyes found Elena. "And for 16 years," he said, "the respondent, Mrs. Voss, has lived in his house, eaten his food, driven his cars, and spent his money. She has not worked a day. She has not earned a dollar. She has not contributed 1 cent to the marital estate she now seeks to claim half of." Harriet started to stand. Elena placed one finger on her sleeve. Harriet sat back down. "Your Honor," Blackwood continued, "I am not here to argue that Mrs. Voss is a bad woman. I am here to argue that Mrs. Voss is an ordinary woman. She raised a child. Many women raise children. She ran a household. Many women run households. She is, by every objective measure, an unremarkable person who has spent 16 years benefiting from the remarkable work of her husband." He walked 3 steps closer to Elena's table. He looked directly at her. His smile was small and clean. "An unremarkable person," he repeated, "does not get half of a remarkable man's estate." Elena did not move. She did not blink. Her left hand rested flat across the top of the briefcase. "Therefore," Blackwood said, turning back toward the bench, "Mr. Voss is petitioning for an equitable, not an equal, division. He is further petitioning for sole physical and legal custody of the minor child on the grounds that the respondent has, over the past 18 months, demonstrated behavior consistent with emotional instability and absenteeism from the marital home. We will present evidence today that Mrs. Voss has disappeared for entire weekends without explanation, that she has maintained private correspondence and private bank accounts unknown to my client, that she has, on at least 3 occasions, been witnessed at establishments in downtown Ellis that no married mother has any business being at." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Elena's finger moved once against the leather of the briefcase. A single slow tap. Blackwood returned to his table. He did not sit down. "In summary, Your Honor, my client is a pillar of this community who has spent 16 years supporting a woman who is now, for reasons known only to herself, attempting to extract half of a fortune she did not help build. The petitioner asks the court to see this case for what it is, a parasite trying to leave with the host's blood." He sat. The word hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. Harriet started to rise for objection. Judge Harrison waved her down without looking at her. "Characterization noted and stricken. Mr. Blackwood, watch your language in my courtroom." "Of course, Your Honor." The judge did not sound angry. "Mrs. Moss, opening." Harriet stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her jacket. She walked to a spot just in front of her table and stopped there. "Your Honor, my client, Elena Voss, has been married to James Voss for 16 years. During that time, she has raised their daughter. She has managed their home. She has been a partner, in the truest sense, to her husband's career. My client respectfully requests an equal division of marital assets, as required by state law. My client also requests joint physical and legal custody of the minor child, which is in the best interest of the child." She paused. She looked at her notes. She looked at Elena. She looked back at the notes. "That is all, Your Honor." She sat down. The gallery was silent. Bentley Krause coughed into his fist, and it sounded almost like a laugh. On the other side of the aisle, James leaned back in his chair and crossed his legs. His foot bounced once, twice. He turned his head so that Elena could see the side of his smile. Elena's finger tapped the briefcase. 1, 2, 3. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, "call your first witness." "Petitioner calls Mr. James Voss, Your Honor." James stood. He walked to the stand. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And he said so, help me God, in the warm, confident voice of a man who had never, in his entire adult life, been seriously afraid of a consequence. He sat. Blackwood rose and walked out into his stage again. "Mr. Voss, please state your name and occupation for the record." "James Michael Voss, I'm the founder and chief executive officer of Voss Development Group. And how long have you been married to the respondent? 16 years and 2 months. In your own words, Mr. Voss, tell the court what your wife does for a living. James smiled. He looked directly at Elena. She doesn't, he said. A ripple of laughter in the gallery. The judge did not gavel it. For the record, Mr. Voss, you are stating that your wife has no occupation. She has hobbies. She reads a lot. She's been taking, online classes for 10 years now. Every time I ask her what she's studying, she says something different. History, law, policy, whatever's on Netflix that week, I guess. More laughter. Louder this time. Blackwood waited for it. He wanted it to happen. He let it crest and fall. Mr. Voss, has your wife ever held a job? Not since the day I met her. In the 16 years of your marriage, has she earned a single paycheck? Not one. Has she ever filed a tax return in her own name? She files jointly with me. She's never had any income to report. Mr. Voss, in your opinion, as a man who has been married to Elena Voss for 16 years, what would you say her greatest professional achievement has been? James considered. He made it look like he was considering. He was not considering. He had rehearsed the line. I'd say her greatest professional achievement, he said slowly, has been convincing me she was worth marrying. The laughter that followed was the loudest yet. It rolled through the gallery like a wave. Bentley Krause threw his head back. The red-haired girlfriend put her hand to her mouth. Even the court reporter's shoulders shook once before she caught herself and fixed her face. Judge Harrison tapped his gavel once, lazily, the way a man swats at a slow fly. Order, thank you. Harriet stood. Your Honor, I object to the characterization. Overruled. Mrs. Moss, this is direct examination. Your turn will come. She sat. Elena's hand had not moved from the briefcase. Elena's face had not moved at all. A young woman in the back row of the gallery was weeping quietly into a tissue. Elena did not know her. The woman was, it would later turn out, a junior paralegal at Blackwood and Associates who had been assigned to the Voss case for 6 weeks and who had read the entirety of Elena's supposed file and who had, 2 nights ago, gone home and sat on her bathroom floor and cried because she did not believe a word of what they were about to do to this woman. Her name was Sierra Park. She was 24 years old. She had been out of law school for 14 months. She would become important in approximately 41 minutes. Mr. Voss, Blackwood continued, let's talk about the past 18 months. Have you observed changes in your wife's behavior? Yes. Can you describe them for the court? She started leaving the house without telling me where she was going. She started carrying a briefcase. He pointed. The gallery's eyes followed his finger to the scuffed leather case at Elena's elbow. She said it was for her classes, but it was locked. Always locked. I asked her once what was in it, and she told me, quote, none of your business. Did this concern you? It devastated me. Why? Because we had been honest with each other for 16 years, and suddenly, overnight, my wife was a stranger in my own house. Elena's finger tapped the briefcase again. 4, 5. Mr. Voss, have you ever had reason to believe your wife was unfaithful? Harriet shot up. Objection, relevance. Goes to character and custody, Your Honor, Blackwood said smoothly. Overruled. Harriet sat again. Her cheeks were mottled red. Yes, James said. I have. What is the basis for that belief? 3 occasions in the past year, I came home early from work and she wasn't there. She said she was at the library. She wasn't at the library. Once, a month ago, I drove past the Marriott on 4th Street at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, and her car was in the parking lot. A soft gasp from the gallery. This was, Elena thought with a quiet, distant amusement, the single easiest lie to disprove in the entire performance. She had been at the Marriott on that Tuesday. She had been there for exactly 47 minutes. She had been there meeting a man. The man had been a retired federal prosecutor named Alan Reyes, who had once been her supervising officer at the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Allen was 71 years old, married for 43 years, and had driven 3 hours from the state capitol to hand her a sealed envelope. The envelope was, at that moment, in her briefcase. "Mr. Voss," Blackwood said, "do you love your wife?" James looked at Elena. He held her eyes. "I love the woman I married," he said. "No further questions, Your Honor." Blackwood sat down. Judge Harrison glanced at his watch. "Cross, Mrs. Moss." Harriet stood. She walked to the spot Blackwood had used, and she stood there awkwardly for a moment, as if realizing for the first time that the light over it was not flattering. "Mr. Voss, you testified that your wife has never earned a paycheck. Are you aware of whether she holds any professional certifications?" James laughed, an actual laugh. "Certifications in what? Answer the question, please." "No, I am not aware of any certifications my wife holds, because she doesn't hold any." "You are aware of that for a fact." "I'm married to the woman. I'd know." "No further questions, Your Honor." Harriet sat down. Elena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Behind the lids, a word formed and unformed. It was not a word she said out loud. It was, in a language her grandmother had spoken, the word for patience. If you're watching this thinking no one should be allowed to treat a woman this way in a courtroom, you are absolutely right. And I promise you the turn is coming. Smash that like button and let's keep going. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwood, next witness. Petitioner calls Mrs. Margaret Voss, Your Honor." Elena's spine did not move, but her eyes did. They found her mother-in-law in the second row of the gallery where Margaret Voss had been sitting, unnoticed, in a cream-colored cardigan and pearls, for the entire proceeding. Margaret was 74 years old. She had lost her husband 6 years ago and her only son, it would turn out, much later than that. She stood now, a small, thin woman with her son's jaw and her granddaughter's eyes, and she walked to the witness stand and placed her hand on the Bible, and when she said "I do," her voice shook on the second syllable. She sat. She did not look at her daughter-in-law. "Mrs. Voss," Blackwood said gently. His voice changed for elderly witnesses. He softened it. He slowed it. "Can you tell the court how long you have known the respondent, Elena Voss?" 16 years, since my son brought her home for Thanksgiving." "In those 16 years, what has been your assessment of her as a wife and mother?" Margaret swallowed. "She is," she said, "a good mother." "And as a wife?" A long pause. "She is private." "Private how, ma'am?" "She doesn't share, about herself, about her past, about her family. I've asked her about her own mother at least a dozen times over the years. I don't know her mother's first name. I don't know where she's from. I don't know where she grew up. Every time I ask, she changes the subject." "Did that strike you as unusual?" "Yes." "Did you ever express concerns to your son?" "I did." "What did you tell him?" Margaret looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring was loose on her finger. She twisted it once. "I told him," she said slowly, "that I was worried he did not truly know the woman he had married." Blackwood let that sit in the room for 3 full seconds. "Thank you, Mrs. Voss. No further questions." Harriet stood. "Mrs. Voss, in the 16 years you have known my client, have you ever known her to be unkind to your son?" "No." "Have you ever known her to be unkind to your granddaughter?" Margaret's face crumpled, briefly before she caught it. "No, never. Chloe adores her." "Have you ever known her to lie to you?" I don't know." "You don't know because you have never caught her in a lie. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Thank you. No further questions." Margaret was excused. She walked back to her seat slowly, and as she passed Elena's table, she paused. Her lips moved. 3 words. "Forgive me. Please." Elena did not look at her. Elena stared straight ahead at the bench. Margaret sat down in the second row next to Bentley Krause, who did not make room for her. She folded her hands in her lap. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, "how many more witnesses?" "3, Your Honor. The next is brief." "Proceed." Petitioner calls Dr. Andrew Prine. A man in a 3-piece suit rose from the 3rd row. He was perhaps 50, balding, gold-rimmed glasses. He walked to the stand with the comfortable gait of a man who had walked to stands many times. He was sworn in. He sat. "Dr. Prine, please state your credentials for the court." "I hold a Ph.D. in clinical psychology from the University of Michigan. I am board-certified in forensic psychology. I have testified as an expert witness in over 200 custody and divorce proceedings in this state." "Dr. Prine, have you had the opportunity to review the respondent's social media presence, public records, and publicly available behavioral history?" "I have." "And based on that review, in your expert opinion, have you reached any preliminary conclusions about the respondent's fitness as a primary custodial parent?" Harriet stood. "Objection, Your Honor. This is not a proper expert witness. He has never met my client. He has never interviewed her. He has never conducted a psychological evaluation of her. He cannot offer a professional opinion on her fitness as a parent." "Sustained in part," Judge Harrison said, looking at his watch. "Dr. Prine, you may offer observations based only on the materials you reviewed. You may not offer a clinical diagnosis." "Understood, Your Honor." "Dr. Prine," Blackwood continued as if nothing had happened, "based on your observations of the respondent's publicly available behavioral history, are there any patterns that concern you?" "Yes, several." "Please describe them." "The respondent has, over approximately 18 months, exhibited what I would characterize as consistent patterns of concealment: private bank accounts, unexplained absences, refusal to disclose her whereabouts to her spouse, a locked briefcase she carries at all times. These behaviors, in aggregate, are typical of individuals engaged in either adulterous relationships or, in some cases, more serious misconduct." Another murmur from the gallery. Harriet's face had gone the color of brick. "Dr. Prine," Blackwood said, "in your opinion, is a parent who exhibits such patterns an appropriate sole custodian of a minor child?" "In my professional opinion, no." Harriet shot up. "Objection. Sustained. Answer stricken. Dr. Prine, you are instructed not to offer clinical conclusions. Mr. Blackwood, proceed with caution." "Of course, Your Honor. No further questions." Harriet's cross was short. She tried, with a competent but outmatched hand, to establish that Dr. Prine had never been in the same room as Elena Voss. She established it. It did not matter. The jury was not a jury. It was Judge Harrison. And Judge Harrison had been given the story he wanted, and he had allowed enough of it into the record that the story was now the record. Dr. Prine was excused. The judge looked at his watch. "We will take a 15-minute recess. Reconvene at 10:30. The gavel came down. The courtroom rose. It was in the corridor, during the recess, that the first truly ugly thing happened. Elena had stepped out into the hallway for water. Harriet was inside the courtroom on her phone. Chloe was not at the courthouse. Chloe was in 5th period chemistry, where she would remain until her mother came to pick her up at 3:15, because Elena had refused to let her daughter watch this. The hallway outside courtroom 4 was wide and marble and echoing. At the far end, by the elevators, James Voss was standing with Richard Blackwood and 2 of the business associates from the gallery. They were laughing. They were laughing the way men laugh when they have already won. Elena walked past them to the water fountain. She bent. She drank. When she straightened, Richard Blackwood was 3 feet behind her. "Mrs. Voss, a word." She turned. She faced him. "Counsel, you should not be speaking to me without my attorney present. This isn't a legal conversation." He took a step closer. He was 4 inches taller than her, even in her heels. "I want to give you some advice," he said. His voice was quiet, conversational. A man talking about weather. "You are 3 witnesses away from the judge ruling exactly how we want him to rule. You can stop this right now. Tell your attorney you want to settle, accept our terms, walk out of this building with the car and a suitcase and your dignity intact. If you don't—" His hand moved. He reached out and he tapped the top of her briefcase, once, with his index finger. "If you don't," he said, "I will open this up in front of a judge and I will read whatever's in it to the world, and whatever little secret you are hiding in here is going to become the funniest thing the Ellis County Bar has heard all year. Do we understand each other, Mrs. Voss?" Elena looked at his finger on her briefcase. She looked at his face. She smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in the courthouse. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a woman who has been waiting for a very long time. "I understand you perfectly, Mr. Blackwood," she said. Behind them, 10 paces down the corridor, the bailiff with the flag pin on his lapel had stopped walking. He was watching the exchange with the complete stillness of a man whose job had for 24 years been to pay attention to small things. His eyes moved from Blackwood's finger to the briefcase to Elena's face. Something in his expression changed. He did not approach. He did not intervene. A bailiff does not intervene in a hallway conversation between an attorney and a party. But he did not leave either. He stood at parade rest, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose at his sides, and he watched. Richard Blackwood noticed him. Blackwood turned slightly. He looked the bailiff over. He saw a bailiff. He saw a uniform. He saw a man with 30 years of government service who would retire in 5 years on a state pension. He dismissed him. "Think carefully, Mrs. Voss," Blackwood said. "You have about 10 minutes. He turned and walked back toward James and the associates. Elena stood by the water fountain. She looked down at the briefcase. She looked up at the bailiff. The bailiff held her eyes. He did not nod. He did not smile. But he brought his right hand up, very slowly, and he straightened the flag pin on his lapel. It was not a flag pin. Elena saw it from 7 feet away. She had known what it was from the moment she walked into courtroom 4. It was a small bronze disc with an eagle, a set of crossed swords, and a Latin motto around the rim. It was a Judge Advocate General's Corps insignia. The bailiff had served. A long time ago, he had served under the same flag Elena had served under, in the same branch, in the same corps. He had not known who she was when she first walked past him that morning. He was beginning to suspect. He was not sure yet. But the way she had held her spine when Blackwood tapped her case had told him something his 30 years in and around courtrooms had taught him to notice. He inclined his head, less than an inch. Elena inclined hers back, less than an inch. Then she walked back into courtroom 4. The second ugly thing happened as she reached the doorway. James was standing in it, was standing in. He had stationed himself to block her path. He had his hands in his pockets. He was, for a moment, almost charming again. "Can we talk for a second?" "No." "Elena." "No." She tried to step around him. He moved. She tried to step around him the other way. He moved again. The corridor behind her was suddenly empty. Blackwood had taken the associates down to the men's room. The bailiff was not immediately visible. There was one other person in the corridor, an elderly woman sitting on a bench reading a paperback, and she was far enough away that she could see what was happening, but she could not hear it. "I'm giving you one more chance," James said. His voice had dropped to the same low register he had used in the kitchen at 6 a.m. "You walk out of this hearing right now. You tell Harriet you want to settle. You sign whatever Richard puts in front of you, and I let you see Chloe on weekends. Move, James. I am not moving until you agree. Move!" He grabbed her upper arm. It was not a grab like in the elevator. It was not a grab like in the kitchen. This was different. His hand closed around her bicep and he squeezed, hard enough that she felt her pulse stutter against his thumb, and he pulled her half an inch closer to him so that his face was directly above hers. "I own you," he said. "I have owned you for 16 years. You do not walk into a courtroom and pretend to be something you aren't. You are my wife. You are the mother of my child. You are nothing else. Are we clear?" Her briefcase was still on her shoulder. Her other hand was free. For one long moment, Elena considered exactly what her options were. She considered them as a list, in order, the way she had been trained to consider options under pressure a long time ago in a very different hallway in a very different building. Option 1. Disarm him. Break the thumb. Step through. Walk into court. Option 2. Knee. Step through. Walk into court. Option 3. Do nothing. Wait. She chose option 3. She stood perfectly still. She let him hold her arm. She looked up into his face with the same steady gray eyes Chloe had inherited from her, and she said, softly, calmly, the way one might address a child who has done something unforgivable, "James, let go of me." Something in her voice made him let go. He did not understand why. He would not understand for another 70 minutes. But his hand opened and his arm dropped, and Elena walked past him into courtroom 4, and she took her seat next to Harriet, and she placed her briefcase on the table, and she laid her left hand flat across the top of it. She did not rub her arm. She did not look back at him. She waited. 72 seconds later, James walked in and sat down at the petitioner's table, and he was pale. The bailiff, who had appeared at the far end of the corridor exactly 3 seconds after James grabbed her arm and had been prepared to cross the distance in 4 strides if Elena had signaled him, followed James into the courtroom and took his place by the bench. His flag pin was level. His expression was flat. Judge Harrison returned to the bench. The courtroom rose. The courtroom sat. "Mr. Blackwood, continue." "Petitioner calls Ms. Bethany Caldwell, Your Honor." The red-haired girlfriend stood up. A low electric current went through the gallery. Even Bentley Krause leaned forward in his seat. Ms. Bethany Caldwell walked to the stand. She was 28 years old. She was the receptionist at Voss Development Group. She had been sleeping with James Voss for 11 months. She had been sleeping with him, Elena knew, since almost exactly the day Elena had started carrying the briefcase. Bethany swore on the Bible. Bethany sat. "Ms. Caldwell, please state your relationship to the petitioner." I work at his company. I'm his receptionist." "Have you ever had cause to believe that Mr. Voss's marriage was troubled?" "Yes." "Based on what?" "Based on conversations I've had with him. Mr. Voss is a kind man. He's been very upset for a long time. He's talked to me about it, about his wife, about how she shuts him out." Harriet stood. "Objection. Hearsay." "Goes to state of mind, Your Honor," Blackwood said. "Not truth of the matter." Overruled. Harriet sat. "Ms. Caldwell, have you ever met Mrs. Elena Voss?" "Once. At the company Christmas party 2 years ago." "What was your impression of her?" "She was cold. She wouldn't even shake my hand. She looked right through me." This, too, was a lie that Elena could have destroyed in one sentence. Elena had shaken Bethany's hand at the Christmas party 2 years ago. Elena remembered the handshake with perfect clarity because Bethany had been wearing a perfume Elena had recognized. It was the same perfume Elena had found on the collar of one of James's shirts 3 weeks earlier. Elena had shaken Bethany's hand, and she had smiled at her, and she had said, "How wonderful to meet you." And then she had walked to the bar and ordered a club soda and sipped it calmly while watching her husband watch his mistress across the room. That had been the night Elena had decided what was going to happen, eventually, in a courtroom. "Ms. Caldwell, in your time working for Mr. Voss, have you ever observed any behavior on Mrs. Voss's part that concerned you?" "Once. About 6 months ago. I was working late. Mrs. Voss came into the office. She went into Mr. Voss's office when he wasn't there. She was in there for about 20 minutes. When she came out, she had a file with her. She put it in her briefcase." Elena's finger tapped the briefcase. 6, 7. "Did you report this to Mr. Voss?" "I did." "Was the file ever located?" "No." "Thank you, Miss Caldwell. No further questions." Harriet stood up. She walked to the witness stand. She looked at Bethany Caldwell for a long moment. "Ms. Caldwell, Are you currently in a romantic or physical relationship with Mr. James Voss? The gallery drew a collective breath. Bethany's face went red. Blackwood was on his feet. Objection. Relevance, Your Honor. The witness's personal life is not at issue. Your Honor, Harriet said, the witness has just testified to my client's character and conduct. Her own relationship with the petitioner goes directly to her bias and credibility. Judge Harrison considered. He considered for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he did something that even Blackwood did not expect. Sustained. Harriet's mouth opened. Your Honor. Sustained, Mrs. Moss. Move on. Harriet stood in the middle of the courtroom, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and a slightly trembling chin, and in that moment every person in the gallery understood that Elena Voss had been brought to this courtroom not for a hearing, but for an execution, and that the judge was the executioner. Elena's hand stayed flat on the briefcase. No further questions, Harriet said finally. She sat. Bethany was excused. She walked back to her seat in the gallery. She did not look at Elena. She sat down 2 seats from the now empty spot where Margaret Voss had been sitting. Margaret had quietly left during the recess and had not returned. James Voss reached over the low wooden railing between the gallery and the respondent's side, and he placed his hand on Bethany's shoulder, and he squeezed, gently, reassuringly, in full view of the courtroom, in full view of Elena. It was, perhaps, the moment at which Richard Blackwood lost the case, because it was the moment at which the bailiff, with the JAG pin on his lapel, whose name was Thomas Reyes, and who had served as a master sergeant in the United States Army from 1986 to 2009, the last 10 years of which he had served as a bailiff in a military courtroom at Fort Sam Houston, saw James Voss squeeze another woman's shoulder 6 feet from the wife James had just grabbed by the arm in the corridor, and Thomas Reyes decided, quietly, that whoever Elena Voss was, she was going to have the full and silent assistance of every service member in the building before this day was done. He did not know yet who she was, but his hand, resting casually on the butt of his service sidearm, moved slightly. He adjusted his stance. He became, without any visible change, a man at attention. Sierra Park, the young paralegal in the back row, noticed. She was the only person in the gallery who noticed, because she was the only person in the gallery who had spent the last 6 weeks reading the full history of Elena Voss's concealed past. She had been told to look for dirt. She had found, instead, something else, something that did not fit. She had found, buried in a sealed federal record she was not supposed to have been able to access, a name. A single name, attached to a single signature, attached to a single order issued 21 years ago in a courtroom 800 miles from Ellis County. She had recognized the name. She had not told Richard Blackwood. She was sitting in the back row of the gallery now, with her hands folded tightly in her lap, and she was watching the bailiff with the flag pin straighten at attention, and she was beginning to understand that she might be the only person in the room, other than Elena herself, who knew what was about to happen. Sierra Park looked at her phone. She opened her text messages. She composed a message to a law school friend named Teresa who worked at the state Supreme Court clerk's office. "Are you at your desk?" The reply came in 10 seconds. "Yes, why?" "Can you pull a sealed file if I give you a docket number?" "Depends on the case. It's under the name Marchetti. First name, Elena." There was a long pause, then the reply. "Sierra, where did you get that name?" Sierra looked up at the woman at the respondent's table. Elena Voss sat with her back straight and her hand on the briefcase and her face empty. Sierra looked back down at her phone. "I'm at a hearing right now. She's here. She's sitting across from me." The reply came faster this time. "Sierra, get out of that room. Get out of that room and call me right now. You have no idea who that woman is." Sierra read the message. She read it again. She did not get out of the room. She stayed in her seat. Because she had worked 14 months at Blackwood and Associates, and she had watched her boss humiliate 3 other women in 3 other hearings the way he was now humiliating Elena Voss, and she had gone home 3 times, and she had cried on 3 different bathroom floors, and she was not going to miss this one. She tucked the phone into her jacket pocket. She folded her hands in her lap. She watched. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said. "Next witness." "Petitioner calls Mr. Peter Halverson, Your Honor." A thin man in a brown suit stood up. He was the Voss family accountant. He had been the Voss family accountant for 11 years. He walked to the stand with the slightly fearful gait of a numbers man who knew he was about to be the instrument of somebody's ruin. He was sworn in. He sat. "Mr. Halverson, please state your occupation." "I am a certified public accountant. I serve as the personal and business accountant for Mr. James Voss and his family." "In that role, have you had occasion to review the financial records of both Mr. and Mrs. Voss?" "I have." "In the 16 years you have served as the family accountant, has Mrs. Voss ever had any independent source of income reflected in your records?" "No, sir." "Has she ever had a checking account in her name alone?" "Not that has been disclosed to me." "Has she ever filed a tax return separate from her husband's?" "No." "Based on your 11 years of professional experience with the Voss family finances, Mr. Halverson, what would you say Mrs. Voss's financial contribution to the marital estate has been?" Halverson looked at his hands. "0, he said. $0. The word hung in the courtroom. Elena's finger tapped the briefcase. 8, 9, 10. On the 10th tap, she stopped. Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly in his chair. His face had taken on the satisfied expression of a man watching a television program that was going the way he had expected. He glanced at his watch. He glanced at the clock on the wall. He made a note on the pad in front of him. "Thank you, Mr. Halverson," Blackwood said. "No further questions." Harriet stood. She looked tired. "Mr. Halverson, you testified that Mrs. Voss has no income reflected in your records. Is it possible for a person to have income that does not flow through the family accountant?" "Theoretically, I suppose. For example, if Mrs. Voss had a separate retirement account, from before the marriage, funds she had earned and saved prior to meeting Mr. Voss, would that income appear in your records?" "It would depend on whether she disclosed it." "And you are telling the court she did not disclose it?" "She did not." "Is it possible that she had such an account and simply did not report it to you because you are the family accountant and it was her separate property?" Halverson hesitated. That would be unusual, but possible." "Thank you. No further questions." It was a small opening, a very small one. Elena's eyes moved once to her attorney, and she gave Harriet the smallest nod Harriet had ever received. It was a good thread. Harriet had finally pulled a thread. She just did not know yet what was sewn to it. Halverson was excused. "Mr. Blackwood, next witness." Blackwood rose. He looked at the judge. He looked at Elena. He smiled. "Your Honor, at this time the petitioner moves to enter into evidence Exhibit P-17. This is a compiled briefing document prepared by my office summarizing the respondent's known public activity over the past 18 months. It includes timestamps, locations, photographs, and cross-referenced witness statements." "Objection," Harriet said. "Your Honor, we have not been provided." "You were provided a copy of this briefing at 8 a.m. this morning, Mrs. Moss, via courier. I have the signed receipt." He slid a piece of paper across to the bench. Harriet's face went white. She turned to Elena. "Did you—" "It arrived at the house," Elena said quietly, "after I left." "Overruled," said the judge. "With the court's permission," Blackwood continued, "I will walk through the key findings for the record, so that the judge may evaluate whether the respondent is a fit custodian for the minor child. You may proceed, Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood turned to the courtroom. He held a single piece of paper in his hand. He did not need it. He had memorized it. "On September 14th of last year," he began, "the respondent was photographed entering the lobby of the Whitmore building in downtown Ellis at 2:15 p.m. The Whitmore building, as Your Honor is aware, is home to a number of law firms, but is also home to the offices of Dr. Lionel Gross, a family reproductive therapist. The respondent spent 1 hour and 40 minutes in the building. She did not tell her husband she was going there. She did not tell anyone. Elena's face did not change. Dr. Lionel Gross was not a reproductive therapist. Dr. Lionel Gross was a dentist. Elena had gone to the Whitmore building that afternoon to have a molar filled. But a small and grotesquely plausible lie had just been entered into the record, and Elena knew, with the clear, cold part of her mind that had been trained many years ago to predict the tactics of hostile opposing counsel, exactly where Blackwood was going. He was going to accuse her of having had an abortion. He did. On October 4th, Blackwood continued, the respondent was observed at the Ellis General Hospital Emergency Clinic for approximately 3 hours. No medical emergency affecting the household was reported to Mr. Voss. No record of any injury was observed upon her return home. The nature of her visit is, to this day, unknown to her husband. My office has been unable to obtain her medical records, as they are, of course, sealed. Elena had been at Ellis General on October 4th. She had driven there at 2 in the morning to sit with Sister Agnes Marchetti, her 81-year-old great-aunt on her mother's side, who had called Elena at 1:45 a.m. from a nursing home in agony from a ruptured appendix. Elena had sat with her through the surgery. Sister Agnes had survived. Elena had not told James because James had made it clear, 12 years before, that Elena's mother's side of the family were, in his exact words, peasants in habit. Blackwood's voice had gone lower, softer, the voice of a storyteller leaning in to deliver a punchline. On November 19th, he said, the respondent attended a dinner at Laurent's, a restaurant on the west side of Ellis, party of 2. Her companion was a man approximately 70 years of age. The 2 of them stayed for 2 hours. The respondent paid the bill in cash. Upon leaving, they embraced. My office has photographs. He slid 3 glossy 8x10 photographs onto the exhibit table. Elena did not have to look to know what they were. The man in the photographs was Alan Reyes. Alan Reyes was, in addition to being a retired federal prosecutor and her former commanding officer, the man who had given Elena away at her wedding 16 years ago. Her own father had died when she was 11. Alan Reyes had been standing in for him that day. The embrace in the photograph had taken place in the parking lot of Laurent's, after Alan had informed Elena that his wife, a woman Elena loved almost as much as her own mother, had received a cancer diagnosis that morning. Elena had held the old man for a long moment in the parking lot. She had told him she would drive to the Capitol the next weekend to help them. She had. Blackwood was saying the words, extramarital conduct. He was saying, inappropriate relationship. He was saying the phrase, pattern of deception. And Judge Harrison was nodding slowly, writing on his pad. Elena closed her eyes. She opened them. She turned her head, deliberately, to the gallery. Her eyes found Sierra Park in the back row. Sierra Park, who had just received a second text from her friend at the Supreme Court clerk's office. A text that read, "Whatever is happening in that room right now, record it. Record everything. Do not leave." Sierra had her phone face down in her lap. She had already turned on the recorder. She had been recording for 14 minutes. Elena did not know this, but Elena did see the way Sierra Park was looking at her. It was not pity. It was the look of a young woman who had recognized, belatedly, that she was sitting in the front row of something historic, and who intended not to look away. Elena held the young paralegal's eyes for perhaps a second and a half. Then she turned back to the bench. "Mr. Blackwood," she said. The courtroom froze. Elena had not spoken a single word on the record all morning. She had not been called as a witness. She had not asked a question. She had sat. She had listened. Now, from her seat at the respondent's table, she had said Mr. Blackwood in a voice that was level, polite, and clearly audible in every corner of the room. Harriet Moss, beside her, hissed, "Elena, you can't—" Blackwood turned slowly. His surprise was genuine for perhaps a quarter of a second. Then it was replaced by pleasure, because Richard Blackwood had been hoping privately for the last 2 hours that Elena Voss would break. "Mrs. Voss," he said, "is there a problem? You referred to Exhibit P-17 as a compiled briefing." "I did." "You said it was prepared by your office." "I did." "I would like, with the court's permission, to ask you a question about its preparation." "Your Honor," Harriet said, rising, "I have not— my client has not been sworn. She is not on the witness stand. This is—" "Mrs. Voss," Judge Harrison said. His voice was even. He looked for the first time that morning interested. "You understand that if you make a statement from that seat, it is not under oath, and it is not evidence." "I understand, Your Honor." "Then why are you speaking?" Elena stood. She stood slowly. She stood the way a person stands who has been waiting for a long time to stand. She placed her hands flat on the table on either side of the briefcase. She did not open it. "Because Mr. Blackwood has just entered into the record," she said, "a compiled intelligence briefing that purports to summarize my activity over the last 18 months. I would like to know, for the record, the name of the licensed private investigator who prepared it." Blackwood smiled. "Mrs. Voss, it was prepared by my staff." "Your staff?" "Correct." "By a licensed investigator on your staff?" "By various members of my staff under my supervision." "Mr. Blackwood, is it your position, on the record in this courtroom, that you compiled an 18-month surveillance briefing on me, including photographs, using members of your office staff?" The courtroom had gone very quiet. Judge Harrison leaned forward. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, "answer the question." Blackwood's smile did not move, but his eyes flicked for 1 microsecond to his associate in the second row. "Your Honor, the materials were compiled from publicly available sources." "Mr. Blackwood, I am looking at photograph 3. It appears to be taken through a telephoto lens from approximately 60 feet away at night in a private parking lot. Is it your position that this is a publicly available source?" "Your Honor." "Mr. Blackwood, answer the question. The photograph was obtained from a subcontractor. Is the subcontractor a licensed private investigator in this state?" I would need to check." "You would need to check." Judge Harrison set his pen down on his pad. He looked now at Elena Voss. He looked at her for the first time that morning. He really looked at her. He looked at her plain, navy dress. He looked at her dark hair pulled back. He looked at her hands flat on the table on either side of the scuffed leather briefcase. He looked, finally, at her face. And for the first time in the 4 hours Judge Gerald Harrison had been presiding over Voss versus Voss, something moved in his expression that was not disapproval. It was the faintest dawning of a thought. He did not know yet what the thought was, but the thought was this: "I have seen this woman before. Not in a photograph, not at a country club, not in a newspaper, somewhere else. Somewhere professional. Somewhere where Gerald Harrison had been, briefly, 20-odd years ago, the junior man in the room. His brow furrowed, his eyes narrowed. If you are still with me, you are about to witness the single most satisfying courtroom turn of your life. Hit the like button one more time and let's get there together." "Mrs. Voss," the judge said slowly, "please sit down." Elena did not sit down. "Your Honor, may I make a statement of clarification to the court?" "Mrs. Voss, you are not sworn." "I understand, Your Honor. I would like to request a brief recess to confer with my attorney, and upon return, I would like to testify." Judge Harrison's eyes, narrower still. "You are requesting to take the stand, Mrs. Voss?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Against the advice of your counsel?" "With the permission of my counsel." She turned to Harriet. Harriet, who had at no point in 16 years of practicing law ever been on the end of this particular look from a client. Harriet, who was 62 years old, and who had been retained in this case specifically because she was a decent woman without the killer instinct to push back on a man like Richard Blackwood. Harriet looked at her client. Elena said very quietly, "Harriet, I am asking you to permit it." Harriet swallowed. "Your Honor," Harriet said. "My client may take the stand after the recess, with my permission." Judge Harrison looked at Blackwood. Richard Blackwood was smiling again. Because Richard Blackwood was going to get to cross-examine Elena Voss under oath, and in his 23-year career, a cross-examination was something he had never lost. 15-minute recess, the judge said. We reconvene at 11:30. Mrs. Voss, at that time, you will be sworn. The gavel came down. The courtroom rose. The bailiff with the JAG pin on his lapel did not look at Elena. But as she turned to gather her briefcase, Thomas Reyes moved 3 steps toward the respondent's table, positioned himself between Elena and the aisle where Richard Blackwood would have to pass, and remained there, hands clasped behind his back, until Blackwood had walked down the other aisle and out of the courtroom. It was, if anyone had known to look for it, the exact formal distance at which a master sergeant places himself between a visiting officer and a hostile civilian. Sierra Park saw it. Sierra Park, in the back row, had stopped pretending to scroll through her phone. Her phone was face down on her thigh, the recorder still running. She was watching the bailiff. She was watching the woman at the respondent's table. She was watching her phone screen light up with a third text from her friend at the Supreme Court clerk's office. The text read, "Sierra, I pulled the sealed docket. I can't tell you everything, but listen to me. The woman sitting across from Richard Blackwood in that room is the single most decorated JAG officer of her generation. She was also, for 4 years before she took her leave of absence, a sitting federal appellate judge. And the opinion she wrote in her last case before she left the bench is the precedent Richard Blackwood just cited in his opening statement." Sierra read the text. She read it again. Then she looked up very slowly across the emptying courtroom. Elena Voss was standing at the respondent's table. She was looking back at Sierra. Across 50 feet of lemon-polished wood and muttering gallery, and the confused retreating back of Richard Blackwood, Elena Voss was looking directly at Sierra Park with the slightest tilt of her head, and her left hand was resting, for the first time that morning, on the brass clasp of her briefcase. She pressed it with her thumb. The clasp clicked. The briefcase opened half an inch. From across the room, Sierra Park saw the corner of a thick manila folder inside. On the folder, in red ink, were 3 block letters. JAG. Elena closed the briefcase. The clasp snapped shut. She lifted the case by its worn leather handle, and she walked, slowly, calmly, unhurried as a tide coming in, out of courtroom 4 toward the hallway, where a retired master sergeant named Thomas Reyes was already holding the door open for her, standing at parade rest, his flag pin level on his lapel and his right hand, ever so slightly, lifting toward the brim of a cap he was no longer entitled to wear in a courthouse, but that his muscle memory had, after 30 years of service, nearly raised anyway. Elena walked past him. As she passed, her voice was so quiet that only he could hear it. "Master Sergeant? Ma'am? Thank you for your service. It is my honor, Colonel." She did not react. She walked down the corridor toward the attorney conference rooms, her briefcase in her hand and a phone already coming out of her pocket. And in the emptying gallery of courtroom 4, Sierra Park pressed stop on her recorder, slid her phone into her jacket, and rose to follow, because she had just realized that the story she was about to witness was not the story Richard Blackwood had been preparing for 6 weeks. It was a very different story. It was a story that had been prepared, quietly, patiently, over 11 months of a woman carrying a locked briefcase through her own house. It was a story in which the judge on the bench was not the highest-ranking judicial officer in the room, and it was a story that, in 35 minutes, was going to end the career of Richard Blackwood, and the marriage, and the fortune, and the freedom of James Voss, in exactly that order, in front of his mistress, his mother, his business partners, and the 22-year veteran of the Ellis County bench whose face had just begun, at long last, to remember. It was 11:17 a.m. Court would reconvene in 13 minutes. The woman in the plain navy dress was already on the phone with the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, and somewhere on the 7th floor of the Ellis County Courthouse, in a men's room near the elevators, Richard Blackwood was washing his hands and smiling at his reflection because he did not yet know that he had, that morning, picked the wrong fight. He would know in 13 minutes. He would know for the rest of his life. The attorney conference room on the 7th floor of the Ellis County Courthouse was a box. Fluorescent ceiling, gray industrial carpet, a single rectangular table scarred by 2 decades of coffee cups and attaché cases. There was a phone on the wall that nobody had used since 2011. There was a framed print of a sailboat that nobody had looked at since 1998. Elena Voss closed the door behind her. She set the briefcase on the table. She did not sit down. Harriet Moss sat down. Harriet Moss sat down because her knees had decided, somewhere between the courtroom and the conference room, that they were done standing for a while. The older woman placed her reading glasses on the table. She folded her hands. She looked at her client. Elena. Yes. Who are you? Elena did not answer immediately. She took her phone from her jacket pocket. She unlocked it. She opened her contacts. She scrolled past the names she had typed in for the last 16 years. Pediatrician, school office, dry cleaner, the contractor who had redone the second bathroom. And she stopped at a name near the bottom. A name that had been in the phone for 11 months. A name that Harriet Moss would not have recognized even if she had been allowed to see it, because it was only 3 initials and an area code that did not belong to this state. She pressed dial. The phone was answered on the second ring. Marchetti. Elena's given name had been Elena Marchetti for the first 29 years of her life. She had kept it as her professional name for another 9 years after she married James. She had only stopped using it in the last 7 when the quiet life had pulled her, for a time, fully under. Chief Justice? A pause on the other end. A long one. Elena. I need a favor. A large one. And I need it in 90 seconds. Where are you? Ellis County Superior Court, Courtroom 4. Divorce proceeding. My own. Another pause, shorter this time. Shorter this. The voice on the other end was dry and careful, and belonged to a woman who had been named to the highest court in the state 11 years ago, and who had been a federal prosecutor before that, and who had, 21 years ago, argued a civil rights appeal in front of a 3-judge panel on which Elena Marchetti had written the unanimous opinion. Tell me what you need. I need a certified duplicate of my bar card, my commission order, my discharge papers, and my appointment letter sent by fax to this courthouse in the next 10 minutes. I need it sent to the clerk of Division 4. I need the cover page to be signed by you personally with the state seal. Done. What else? I need you to call Judge Gerald Harrison, Ellis County Superior, and remind him, privately, that the judicial canons of this state require a sitting judge to recuse when the presiding officer discovers, mid-proceeding, that one of the parties before him is a judicial colleague of equal or superior rank. Elena. I know. Elena, he did not know. He did not know this morning. He is beginning to know now. He will know all the way in 11 minutes. I want him reminded, by a voice he is afraid of what his next move needs to be. Are you certain you want to do this in open court? Yes. Are you certain you want to do it today? Yes. Is there a child involved? Yes. Where is the child? School. What is the opposing counsel's name? Richard Blackwood. The silence on the line was the silence of a Chief Justice of a state Supreme Court going very still. Richard Blackwood of Blackwood and Associates in Ellis. Yes. Elena, is this the case? It is the case. All right. I am walking to my fax machine. You will have the documents in 6 minutes. Judge Harrison will have a phone call in 4. Do you need anything else? One more thing. Name it. I need the direct line for the Office of Professional Conduct of the State Bar. I will text it to you in 30 seconds. Thank you, Chief. Elena. Yes. Finish him. The line went dead. Elena set the phone face down on the conference room table. She placed her palms flat on either side of it. She took one long breath through her nose. When she looked up, Harriet Moss was staring at her as if Harriet had, for the first time in 62 years of life, understood what it meant to be in a room with a person who was not, in the normal sense, a person. "Elena." "Harriet." "What is in the briefcase?" Elena reached out. She pressed the brass clasp with her thumb. The latch clicked. She lifted the lid 2 inches. She did not open it all the way. She slid 3 folders halfway out, one at a time, and she turned each one so Harriet could read the label without touching it. The first folder said Financial Records, Marchetti Trust, 2009 through present. The second folder said Correspondence, J. Voss, Fraudulent Transfers, Undisclosed Accounts. The third folder said JAG Colonel, Elena Marchetti. Commission and Appointment Orders. Copy. Harriet Moss reached up very slowly and put her hand over her mouth. "Oh," she said. "Oh, dear." "Harriet." "Yes. I am going to take the stand in 8 minutes. Richard Blackwood is going to cross-examine me. He is going to try to destroy me on the record. I want you to do exactly 2 things during his cross. Are you listening?" "I am listening." "The first thing you are going to do is nothing. You are not going to object, no matter what he says, no matter how far he goes. Do you understand? Every objection you make protects me from a question he should never have been allowed to ask. I do not want to be protected. I want the questions on the record, every one of them." "Elena?" "The second thing you are going to do is this. When he is finished, and the judge asks if I would like to make any statement beyond the scope of Blackwood's questioning, you are going to stand up and you are going to say the following sentence. 'Your Honor, the respondent invokes Rule 201-4 and requests judicial notice of the attached exhibit. You are going to hand the judge the top folder from this briefcase. You are going to sit down. That is all.'" Rule 201-4. It is the state evidentiary rule covering judicial notice of facts capable of accurate and ready determination. It exists for exactly this moment. It has existed for 31 years. It has been used in the entire history of this state's jurisprudence 6 times. It has never been denied. 6 times. I wrote the opinion clarifying it the 4th time, Harriet. Harriet closed her eyes. She opened them. She nodded. "All right. All right." "Elena." "Yes." "I am so sorry." "For what?" "For taking your case. I should have... if I had known." "Harriet." "Yes. I chose you specifically because you did not know. I needed, for the record, a normal attorney asking normal questions and getting normal answers for 3.5 hours, so that when I stood up and became someone else, nobody in that courtroom could claim it was a staged performance. You were not hired to win this case. You were hired to witness it." Harriet Moss looked at her client for a long moment. Then she picked up her reading glasses and put them back on her face. She stood. She smoothed her skirt. "Colonel Marchetti." "Mrs. Moss." "It has been an honor." "The honor is mine." A soft knock at the conference room door. Elena closed the briefcase. Harriet opened the door. Sierra Park was standing in the hallway. She was 24 years old, and she was holding her phone in one hand, and the other hand was shaking very slightly, and she looked, for one moment, exactly like what she was, which was a very young lawyer in a very expensive jacket, standing at the threshold of the first genuine moral choice of her professional life. "Mrs. Voss?" "Ms. Park." Sierra's eyes widened. "You know my name?" "I have known everyone in that courtroom's name for 4 months, Ms. Park. Come in. Close the door." Sierra closed the door. She did not sit. Her phone was still in her hand. I have been recording the proceedings." "I know. How do you—" "Because you have been recording every hearing at Blackwood and Associates for 6 weeks, Ms. Park, on a personal phone, against the express policy of your firm, saved to a cloud account under the name of your law school roommate. I have known since week 2. Sierra sat down. She sat down very suddenly. "Oh my God." "Ms. Park." "Yes." Are you prepared to turn over those recordings to the Office of Professional Conduct of the State Bar, voluntarily, on the record, today?" Sierra looked at the folded woman in the navy dress. She looked at her phone. She looked at the framed sailboat print on the wall. "Yes. All of them. All of them. Without immunity. Without immunity. You understand what it will cost you. My job, my references, my career in this state for at least the next 3 years. And still yes." Sierra looked up. "And still yes," she said. "Ma'am, whoever you are. I watched him do it to 3 other women. 3 women who had nothing. 3 women who walked out of that courtroom with nothing but a car and a suitcase and the same lie about being unstable mothers. I have been waiting 4 months for one of you to be the last." Elena looked at her for a long, quiet second. Then she crossed the room, and she placed one hand briefly on Sierra Park's shoulder. It was the closest thing to warmth Elena had shown any human being in the Ellis County Courthouse all day. "Ms. Park, you are the last." Elena stepped back. She turned to Harriet. "Harriet, I need one more thing from you." "Name it." "I need you to walk Ms. Park to courtroom 6 on this same floor. Judge Velma Cortez is sitting on domestic motions this morning. You are going to enter her courtroom. You are going to ask for an emergency temporary protective order. You are going to give her this." Elena took a single sealed manila envelope out of the briefcase. It was labeled Emergency Temporary Protective Order. Proposed Findings. Minor Child. Chloe Margaret Voss. Exhibits A through G. Harriet took the envelope with both hands. The child. "He threatened me in the hallway this morning, Harriet. He laid hands on me twice. Ms. Park has the audio of neither, but Ms. Park has 12 other things, and the envelope has photographs of bruising I documented 6 weeks ago when he was drunk. Judge Cortez will grant the order in under 15 minutes. It will keep Chloe with me at an address of my choosing until the criminal and civil matters resolve." "The criminal? We will get to that. Go now." Harriet went. Sierra Park stood, briefly unsteady. She followed. Elena was alone in the conference room. She looked down at the briefcase. She unbuckled the second strap, the one that never came loose, the one that had kept the lid closed extra tight for 11 months. She opened the briefcase all the way. Inside, above the 3 folders, laid flat across the top of the stack, was a 4th folder. It did not have a label. It was thinner than the others. It contained a single document, 11 pages long, stapled in the upper left corner. Elena took the document out. She ran her thumb once down the staple. Then she slid it into the inside pocket of her jacket, over her heart, in the exact place she had, 6 hours earlier, slid the torn caption page of James Voss's divorce petition. She walked out of the conference room. She walked back toward courtroom 4. It was 11:29 a.m. She had 1 minute. The gallery was almost full again when Elena pushed open the courtroom doors. Most of the 28 original spectators had returned. A few of them, Bentley Krause, 2 of the junior business associates, and 1 of Blackwood's paralegals, had left, and their seats had been taken by fresh faces, because news had moved through the 7th floor corridor during the recess, the way news moves through any courthouse on any morning. Something was happening in 4, something worth seeing. James Voss was already at the petitioner's table. He did not look up when Elena walked past him. He was reading his phone. His foot was bouncing under the table at a faster rhythm than it had been bouncing all morning, and there was a faint sheen of sweat along his hairline that had not been there an hour ago. Richard Blackwood was at his own table. He was, if anything, more composed than he had been all morning. A master did not sweat. A master did not bounce his foot. A master sat with his legal pad squared to the corner of his table and his pen at a 45-degree angle, and his eyes following his opponent across the room with the kind of attention a hawk gives a rabbit that has, for some unknown reason, decided to walk directly into an open field. Elena took her seat. She did not place her hand on the briefcase. She did not need to anymore. Thomas Reyes, the bailiff, appeared at her elbow. He leaned down very slightly. "Ma'am, There is a fax for you at the clerk's desk. Thank you, Master Sergeant. The clerk has been instructed by her supervisor to deliver it to the bench directly, at a signal from you. Understood. He did not move away. He stayed there 1 beat longer. Ma'am. Yes. Anything you require from me during the next 15 minutes. Anything at all. Master Sergeant, stand where you stood before the recess. Look exactly how you looked before the recess. That is all I require. Yes, ma'am. He straightened. He walked to his post. The door behind the bench opened. All rise. The courtroom rose. Judge Gerald Harrison climbed back onto the bench. His face was, for the first time that morning, not permanent disapproval. It was, if one looked carefully, a face in transition. The kind of face a man wears when he has, in the last 15 minutes, taken a private phone call he did not expect, from a voice he was afraid of, instructing him of a thing he did not understand, but that he was certain, without understanding it, was about to bend his entire afternoon in a direction he had not chosen. He did not sit. He remained standing at the bench. Be seated. The courtroom sat. Mrs. Voss has requested, with the concurrence of her counsel, to testify in her own matter. Mrs. Voss, please approach the witness stand. Elena stood. She walked the 7 paces from her table to the witness stand. She climbed the single step. She turned. She placed her hand on the Bible. The clerk was a woman in her late 40s with a tight bun and tired eyes. The clerk did not say, "Do you solemnly swear?" The clerk said, "Do you solemnly and sincerely affirm?" Because Elena had, 6 weeks ago, filed with the clerk's office a standing notice that she preferred the affirmation to the oath, a filing that not one person in the gallery understood the significance of, but that had caused Thomas Reyes, when he reviewed the morning's witness list at 7 a.m., to pause for a full 8 seconds with his coffee halfway to his mouth. "I affirm," Elena said. She sat. "State your full legal name for the record," said the clerk. "Elena Marchetti Voss." "Maiden name." "Marchetti." A ripple in the gallery. Nobody knew why yet, but Richard Blackwood had stopped writing. Judge Harrison looked at the respondent's attorney. "Mrs. Moss, your witness." Harriet Moss stood. She walked to the lectern. She looked at her client. And then Harriet Moss, who was 62 years old, and who had not had a surprise moment in her career since 1986, did the single smartest thing she had ever done in a courtroom. She asked one question. "Mrs. Voss, would you like to tell the court about your professional background prior to marrying Mr. Voss?" "I would," Elena said. "Please do." Harriet sat down. Elena folded her hands in her lap. She did not look at James. She did not look at Blackwood. She looked at Judge Harrison. She held his eyes. "I graduated from Stanford University in 1997 with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. I graduated from Yale Law School in 2000. I passed the bar in this state, in New York, and in the District of Columbia in that same year. In 2001, I accepted a direct commission as a first lieutenant in the United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. I served on active duty for 9 years. I reached the rank of colonel. I was deployed 3 times. I served as senior legal advisor to 2 general officers. I tried, as lead prosecutor, 31 courts-martial. I lost 4. In 2010, I was released from active duty and transferred to the Individual Ready Reserve, where I continued to hold my commission until my retirement in 2016. She paused. She took a small sip from the water glass on the rail of the witness stand. In 2011, I was nominated by the President and confirmed by the United States Senate to a seat on the United States Court of Appeals for the 4th Circuit, where I served as a federal appellate judge for 4 years. In 2015, I took a voluntary leave of absence from the bench. I have not sat as a judge since that date. I have not practiced law publicly since that date. I have, for the last 11 years, lived in Ellis County as the wife of Mr. James Voss and the mother of our daughter, Chloe. My bar licenses in all 3 jurisdictions have remained active in good standing that entire time. The courtroom was completely silent. Bentley Krause's mouth was open. Margaret Voss, who who had slipped back into the gallery at 11:25 and who had been sitting in the very back row with her handbag pressed to her chest, made a small choked sound. Bethany Caldwell had gone the color of chalk. James Voss was staring at his wife as if he had never, in 16 years of marriage, actually looked at her. Richard Blackwood's pen had not moved. Judge Harrison, on the bench, had closed his eyes. When he opened them, his face had arrived. It had finished its transition. It was the face of a man who had, in the last 4 minutes, remembered exactly where he had seen Elena Voss before. He had seen her in the Bar Journal, on the cover, 11 years ago, under a headline about the youngest federal appellate judge in the state's recent memory. He had seen her on the dais at the state bar dinner the year she was confirmed. He had been in the back of the room. He had been a county superior court judge at a table of county superior court judges, and she had given a speech about judicial humility, and he had not paid close attention because he did not, in those days, pay close attention to the speeches of women who had just been elevated above him. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He said, quietly, to nobody in particular, "Judge Marchetti." Elena nodded once at him from the witness stand. "Judge Harrison." Harriet Moss, from the respondents' table, began to rise. Elena held up one hand very slightly. Harriet sat back down. "Your Honor," Elena said, "before we proceed to any cross-examination, I would respectfully bring to the court's attention a procedural matter. A fax was delivered to the clerk of this division approximately 4 minutes ago. I believe Your Honor will want to examine it before we continue." Judge Harrison cleared his throat. "Clerk, approach the bench." The clerk walked up. She handed the judge a small stack of papers, still curled from the fax roller. Across the top sheet, through the fluorescent light, Elena could see the embossed seal, the Great Seal of the State, in gold. Judge Harrison read the first page. He read the second page. He read the third page. He set the stack down. "Mr. Blackwood, please approach the bench." Richard Blackwood stood. His face had, at some point in the last 90 seconds, begun to rearrange itself. He had heard Yale Law School. He had heard JAG. He had heard Federal Appellate Judge. He had heard Fourth Circuit. He had heard 11 years of silence and 1 hour of cross-examination questions he had, for 6 weeks, been rehearsing in front of a mirror. He walked to the bench. Judge Harrison did not hand him the fax. "Mr. Blackwood, are you aware that the respondent in this matter is a sitting federal judge on inactive status?" Blackwood's throat worked. "Your Honor, I was not aware." "Are you aware that the precedent you cited at page 7 of your opening briefing, Hargrove versus Ellis County, was written by the respondent?" Blackwood's face, for the first time in his adult life in a courtroom, moved in a way he did not authorize. "Your Honor, are you aware, Mr. Blackwood, that under the judicial canons of this state, which I will be invoking in approximately 4 minutes, any proceeding in which a sitting or inactive judicial officer of equal or superior rank is a party must be, upon discovery, either transferred to a court of equal or superior jurisdiction, or, at the option of the judicial officer party, continued before the current court with an expanded record and direct referral to the State Commission on Judicial Conduct for review. Your Honor, the respondent has been living as a private citizen. Are you aware, Mr. Blackwood?" "I was not aware." "Then you will become aware." "Step back, counsel." Blackwood stepped back. "Mrs. Voss?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you elect to have this matter transferred, or do you elect to continue it before this court?" "I elect to continue it before this court, Your Honor, with the understanding that, under State Rule of Judicial Conduct 3-1, your own position on the bench in this matter is subject to review." Judge Harrison looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way a man looks at a field he has been plowing for 22 years when someone has just informed him that the field is not his, that it never was his, that everything he has planted in it has been, by some bureaucratic inevitability, going home with someone else at the end of the season. "Yes, Mrs. Voss." "Judge Harrison, under State Rule 3-1, a presiding judicial officer who has, prior to the moment of discovery, demonstrated in the record a pattern of ruling against a party consistent with personal or social bias may voluntarily disclose the potential conflict and, with the consent of all parties, continue the matter with a supplemented record documenting the disclosure. Would Your Honor like to make a disclosure at this time for the record? Gerald Harrison closed his eyes again. 22 years of ruling from this bench. A friendship with James Voss's late father that had begun at the country club in 1987, that had endured through 3 failed mayoral campaigns and 2 failed marriages and 1 quiet bankruptcy in 1993, that Gerald Harrison had personally helped the elder Voss survive by steering a bankruptcy trustee toward a less aggressive schedule. A friendship that had included Sunday mornings on the golf course until 2019 and a eulogy in the spring of 2020. He opened his eyes. "The court discloses," he said slowly, "that the petitioner's late father, Mr. Eugene Voss, was a personal friend of the court for approximately 32 years. The court further discloses that the court has, on social occasions, been in the company of the petitioner, Mr. James Voss, in a non-judicial capacity. The court further discloses that this disclosure should have been made at the calendaring of this matter 6 months ago and was not." He swallowed. "The court further discloses that in the ruling made from this bench on Mrs. Voss's pretrial motion to continue the matter, the court expressed to a private clerk that the motion was, in the court's words, typical of a wife stalling a settlement, an expression that the court recognizes, in hindsight, to have been improper." A murmur in the gallery. An actual murmur, loud enough this time that Thomas Reyes did not bother to quiet it. "Mrs. Voss, having made this disclosure, does the respondent consent to the continuation of this matter before this bench?" Elena looked at the judge for a long moment. "The respondent does not consent, Your Honor." "Noted. The respondent further states, for the record, that she will be filing a formal complaint with the State Commission on Judicial Conduct at the conclusion of today's session." Also noted. The respondent further states that she does not, at this time, request Your Honor's immediate recusal. The respondent requests that Your Honor continue to preside through the conclusion of the current witness, which is the respondent herself, and through the conclusion of cross-examination. The respondent requests that Your Honor recuse, at the respondent's request, at that time, for the remainder of all substantive matters, which will then be heard by a judge of Your Honor's superior, appointed from outside the Ellis County system. Judge Harrison was quiet. He was quiet because he had just been given a gift, a small, sharp, dignified gift. Elena Marchetti Voss could have demanded, at that moment, his immediate removal from the bench, his referral in disgrace, and the reopening of every ruling he had issued in the case to date. She had chosen instead to allow him to preside through 1 more hour. She had chosen to let him sit at his bench until the cross-examination of one witness was concluded, and then to step down at his own pace, by his own stated reason. She was not giving him mercy. Elena Marchetti Voss did not give mercy. She was giving him the door, one door, out, on his own feet, in exchange for his cooperation for the next 60 minutes. Judge Harrison looked at her. "The court accepts the terms of the respondent's request." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Mr. Blackwood." "Yes, Your Honor." "You may proceed with your cross-examination of the respondent. I remind counsel that the respondent is, under state law, a sitting judicial officer of superior rank on inactive status, that all questions put to her on this record will be transcribed and may be reviewed by the State Commission on Judicial Conduct and by the State Bar's Office of Professional Conduct. Counsel may want to consider that fact before the formulation of any question. Do you wish for a recess?" Blackwood stood. He was very pale. "Your Honor, given the circumstances, the petitioner respectfully requests that the cross-examination of the respondent be deferred to a future date." Denied. "Your Honor, you moved this matter to trial on an accelerated schedule, Mr. Blackwood. You entered into evidence this morning a surveillance product whose provenance you have not satisfactorily explained. You made characterizations of the respondent that I permitted over counsel's objection. You have cross-examined other witnesses aggressively. You will cross-examine this witness now, or you will waive cross. Which is it? The gallery had gone very still. Richard Blackwood had, in his career, faced 3 state Supreme Court justices, 1 United States attorney, and the general counsel of a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company. He had never, until this moment, faced a county superior court judge on the exact wrong side of a bad morning. The petitioner will waive cross. Duly waived, Mrs. Moss. Harriet rose. Your Honor, the respondent has one short additional statement. Make it, Mrs. Voss. Elena reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. She drew out the 11-page stapled document she had placed there 22 minutes earlier in the conference room. She unfolded it. She began to read. Your Honor, this is a certified copy of Exhibit A to a federal civil complaint. The complaint is styled Marchetti v. Voss, Voss Development Group, LLC, Blackwood and Associates, PLLC, and John Does 1 through 12. It was filed, under seal, in the United States District Court for the Northern District of this state 11 days ago. It alleges, in the first cause of action, violations of Title 18 United States Code Section 1343, wire fraud, against the petitioner, arising out of a 16-year pattern of concealing approximately $41 million of marital income through a network of shell companies registered in Delaware, Nevada, and the British Virgin Islands. A sound from the petitioner's table. Not a word. A sound. The complaint alleges, in the second cause of action, violations of Title 18 United States Code Section 1956, money laundering, against the petitioner and against Mr. Peter Halverson, the accountant who testified this morning. Another sound. The complaint alleges, in the third cause of action, violations of Title 15 United States Code Section 78J, securities fraud, against the petitioner and against 4 officers of Voss Development Group, arising out of false statements made to bond investors between 2014 and 2023. James Voss was gripping the edge of his table so hard that one of his knuckles had split. The complaint alleges, in the fourth cause of action, violations of Title 28 United States Code Section 2680 and the State Private Investigator Licensing Act against Richard Blackwood and Blackwood and Associates PLLC, arising out of the unlicensed surveillance activity reflected in Exhibit P-17 of this morning's proceeding. Blackwood's face was stone. The complaint alleges, in the fifth cause of action, violations of Title 18 United States Code Section 1512, witness tampering, against the petitioner, arising out of threats made in writing to 3 former employees of Voss Development Group who had cooperated with the respondent and with federal authorities in the investigation that preceded this complaint. Elena paused. She looked up from the paper. The complaint has been under seal for 11 days, Your Honor, at the request of the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District. It will be unsealed at 12 noon today. A press release will be issued from the United States Attorney's Office at 12:15. She turned her wrist. She looked at her watch. The time is 11:46 a.m. She turned the paper over. The petitioner, Mr. James Voss, has been given, by the United States Attorney's Office, one opportunity to surrender voluntarily in advance of arrest. That window closes at 12 noon. I am informing him of this window from the witness stand, on the record, in the presence of his attorney and before this court, solely so that no one in this room may later claim he was not offered that opportunity. She folded the paper. She looked directly at her husband for the first time that morning. James, go to the United States Attorney's Field Office at 400 Western Avenue. Go now. Mr. Krause, in the third row, was served with a subpoena this morning at 7 a.m. and will be cooperating with the government. Your accountant has already been cooperating with the government for 4 months. Miss Caldwell, in the fifth row, was interviewed by the FBI at her apartment at 9 p.m. last night, and I believe she has chosen cooperation as well. Your mother, in the back row, is not under any investigation and has been my friend for 16 years, whether you noticed it or not. You have, at this moment, no allies left in this room except your attorney, and your attorney, based on Exhibit P-17, will be indicted alongside you by Tuesday. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. You have 14 minutes. Go. James Voss did not move. James Voss was looking at her with an expression that was, for the first time in 16 years, not contempt, not amusement, not entitlement, but something much older and much more honest, which was raw, animal, unfiltered fear. Thomas Reyes, at his post beside the bench, rested his hand loosely on the butt of his sidearm. He did not draw. He did not need to draw. He simply allowed his hand to arrive at the grip, the way a master sergeant allows his hand to arrive at a grip, which is a movement that is legible to any man who has ever been in a uniform and not legible to any man who has not. James had never been in a uniform, but he understood. He stood. He stood so slowly it looked like a film slowed down. His chair scraped against the floor. The gallery rippled. Bethany Caldwell, in the 5th row, put both her hands over her mouth and did not take them down. "Your Honor," Richard Blackwood said, his voice not quite his own. "The petitioner." "Mr. Blackwood, sit down. You are not in any condition to make a statement on the record right now, and anything you say in the next 60 seconds will be used against you in approximately 3 separate proceedings. Sit." Blackwood sat. "Mr. Voss." James turned. His eyes were wet. His tie was crooked. "Mr. Voss, you are free to leave the courtroom at this time. This court is not instructing you to remain. This court will, however, be entering into the record a finding that you were served. In open court, notice of a voluntary surrender window of 14 minutes. What you do with that notice is a matter between you, your defense counsel, and the United States Attorney. Do you understand?" James nodded. "Say yes, Mr. Voss, for the record." "Yes." "Go." James walked down the center aisle toward the doors. He walked like a man much older than 48. He passed his mother in the back row. Margaret Voss did not reach for him. She did not rise. She sat very still with her handbag pressed to her chest and tears running freely down both sides of her face, and she did not say a single word to her only son as he walked past her and out of her life. The courtroom doors closed behind him. Thomas Reyes looked at the judge. The judge nodded. Thomas Reyes lifted his radio from his belt. "This is Reyes. Subject of interest exiting 4 toward the east elevator. Maintain visual. Do not engage." A crackle on the other end. "Copy, Reyes." Thomas Reyes put the radio back on his belt. His hand went back to his side. He did not draw the sidearm. He never drew the sidearm. If you have made it this far, you have just watched the single most thorough demolition of a marriage and a law practice in the history of Ellis County. Do me a favor right now. Tap that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you would have done if you had been sitting in that gallery. The real aftermath is about to begin. At 12:01 p.m., the United States Attorney for the Northern District of this state, a woman named Angela Breard, who had known Elena Marchetti for 22 years, stood at a podium in front of a blue curtain in a conference room in a federal building 210 miles from Ellis County, and announced the unsealing of a 47-page criminal complaint against James Michael Voss. At 12:03 p.m., James Michael Voss was arrested by 2 Deputy United States Marshals in the parking garage beneath 400 Western Avenue in Ellis. He had not driven to the field office. He had driven in the opposite direction, toward his own garage, to retrieve a passport from a safe behind a painting in his home office. The deputy marshals had been waiting for him at the garage exit. He did not resist. He did cry. This was recorded by a body-worn camera. The recording would, in 6 months, be entered into evidence at his detention hearing and would result in the denial of his request for pretrial release. At 12:11 p.m., Richard Blackwood walked out of courtroom 4 on the 7th floor of the Ellis County Courthouse and was met at the elevator by 2 investigators from the State Bar's Office of Professional Conduct, who informed him that his law license had been placed on emergency interim suspension pending a review of Exhibit P-17, and that he was not to take any new client matters until that review concluded. Blackwood did not say a word. He walked past them. He took the stairs. At 12:15 p.m., Sierra Park turned over to those same investigators a cloud archive of 147 audio recordings of hearings, deposition preparations, and client intakes from Blackwood and Associates, covering a period of 13 months. She did this in writing. She did this without immunity. She did this after signing an affidavit attesting that she had recorded the materials on a personal device in violation of firm policy and that she accepted the consequences of that violation. 4 months later, she would be reprimanded by the state bar and placed on a 2-year period of professional probation. 11 months later, she would be hired, on probation, by the State Attorney General's Office of Civil Rights, where she would eventually rise to the rank of senior trial counsel. At 12:29 p.m., Elena Voss walked out of the courthouse for the last time as a private citizen. Her briefcase was in her right hand. Her jacket was buttoned. Her hair was still pulled back into its low knot. Thomas Reyes, still on duty, nodded to her as she passed the security checkpoint. She nodded back. She did not take a reporter's microphone. There were 7 reporters on the courthouse steps by 12:30. She walked past all of them without comment. Her car was parked in the garage across the street. She paid her own parking fee. She drove directly to Ellis Country Day School. She arrived at the school at 12:53 p.m. Chloe Voss was pulled out of 6th period biology by the school secretary. Chloe walked into the front office in her uniform with her backpack and saw her mother standing by the visitor sign in book, and she stopped. She stopped so completely that the secretary behind the desk looked up. "Mom." "Chloe." "What happened?" "A lot." Is Dad?" Elena set her briefcase down on the bench by the door. She held out her arms. Chloe, who had not hugged her mother in public since she was 11 years old, walked across the office and into her mother's arms and buried her face in her mother's shoulder. They stood like that for perhaps a minute. Then Elena stepped back. She placed one hand on each of her daughter's cheeks. She looked at her. "Your father has been arrested by federal marshals," she said. "He is going to be in federal custody for a while. He has been charged with several serious crimes. I'm going to tell you everything tonight, all of it. But right now I want you to come home with me. We have a new address for the next few weeks. The house is safe. It is a very small house. You will like it. Do you want to hear why?" Chloe nodded once. "Because your great-aunt Agnes lives there, and I am going to introduce you to her. She has been asking about you for 15 years. Great-aunt. Marchetti, Sister Agnes, my grandmother's younger sister. She is 81 years old and she drinks espresso out of a thimble. Get your things." Chloe got her things. They walked out of the school hand in hand. In the parking lot, as Elena opened the passenger door of the car, Chloe paused with her hand on the frame. Her gray eyes, which were her mother's gray eyes, searched her mother's face. "Mom." "Yes. What is your actual name?" Elena smiled. It was, perhaps, the second real smile of the day. "Elena Voss. I am going to file to drop the Voss at the conclusion of the dissolution. I will still be your mother. You will still be Chloe Voss if that is what you want. Or Chloe Marchetti. Or both. We will decide that together. Get in." Chloe got in. Elena closed the door. She walked around the car. She opened her own door. She got in. She did not cry in front of her daughter. She had not cried in courtroom 4. She had not cried in the conference room. She had not cried in the corridor when James grabbed her arm, and she had to decide, for the 6 millionth time in their marriage, not to act on what her body knew how to do. She started the car. She drove her daughter home. And somewhere on the drive, on a quiet 2-lane road between the school and the small gray house on Laurel Street, where an 81-year-old retired nun was at that moment boiling water for a pot of very strong coffee, Elena Voss allowed one single tear to slide down the side of her face, and she did not lift her hand to wipe it away, because her hands were on the steering wheel and her daughter was beside her, and the worst day of the last 11 months was over. The worst day of the next 18 months was still ahead, but the worst day of the last 11 months was over. The dissolution of marriage was never completed by Judge Gerald Harrison. Judge Harrison recused himself, as promised, at the conclusion of that morning's session. He did so in writing. The recusal order was 4 paragraphs long and made reference to Rule 3-1 and to the court's earlier disclosure. It did not mention Elena Marchetti by name beyond the caption. He did not sit as a judge again. 3 weeks after the recusal, he filed a letter with the governor requesting retirement effective immediately, rather than in 3 months. The governor accepted. The State Commission on Judicial Conduct opened a review of Judge Harrison's rulings in 12 divorce matters over the preceding 8 years, 11 of which had been contested proceedings in which the wife had been the respondent. That review would continue for 14 months. The Commission's findings, issued in the following spring, would conclude that Judge Harrison had demonstrated a pattern of rulings inconsistent with the state's judicial canons and would refer the matter to the Attorney General for civil penalty consideration. No criminal charges were recommended. Judge Harrison kept his pension. He did not keep his name on the plaque in Courtroom 4, which was quietly removed by facilities management 4 months after his retirement. The case Voss versus Voss was reassigned to a special master, a retired appellate judge from the adjacent county, a woman named Helen Ortiz, who had served on the state's 2nd Appellate Division for 20 years, and who had been, briefly, a mentor to Elena Marchetti during Elena's clerkship in 2000, was appointed to complete the dissolution. The proceedings before Judge Ortiz took 9 months. They were not dramatic. They were conducted almost entirely through written submissions. The final decree was entered the following February. Elena Marchetti Voss received 49% of the marital estate, after subtraction of all assets later determined by the federal court to be fruits of criminal activity. She received sole legal and physical custody of Chloe Margaret Voss. James Voss's parental rights were not terminated, but his visitation was conditioned upon completion of a domestic violence intervention program and upon the written recommendation of a child welfare professional. As of this writing, James Voss has not seen his daughter in person in 14 months. He writes to her twice a year, at Christmas and on her birthday. Chloe reads the letters. She does not respond. The criminal case of United States versus Voss did not go to trial. It took 6 months of pretrial motions, 3 months of discovery, and 7 months of plea negotiation before James Michael Voss, advised by his 3rd set of defense attorneys, agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of money laundering. The plea agreement specified a sentence of between 7 and 9 years in federal prison, restitution of $31 million, and a forfeiture order covering approximately $18 million of assets. The final sentence, handed down by a United States district judge who had never before met Elena Marchetti and who was not informed of her presence at the sentencing hearing until she rose from the gallery to deliver a victim impact statement, was 8 years and 4 months. James Voss reported to the Federal Correctional Institution at Allenwood in a Tuesday in November, 18 months after his arrest at 400 Western Avenue. His earliest projected release date, after credits, is in 6 years and 3 months. Richard Blackwood was indicted 13 days after the Voss hearing. His indictment included 3 counts related to unlicensed surveillance under state law and 1 federal count of obstruction of a judicial proceeding, based on the theory that Exhibit P-17 had been submitted with knowledge that portions of it had been fabricated. The fabrication was established through cell tower records and parking lot camera footage that Elena's legal team had preserved months in advance, and through the testimony of 2 former associates at Blackwood and Associates who, like Sierra Park, had been waiting for their own last woman. Blackwood did not plead guilty. Blackwood went to trial 14 months after his indictment. The trial lasted 19 days. He was acquitted on the federal obstruction count. He was convicted on 2 of the 3 state counts of unlicensed surveillance. He was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, of which he served 10. He was permanently disbarred in this state by order of the state Supreme Court. That order was signed by the Chief Justice. The text of the order contained a single sentence quoting, without attribution, the opinion written by Elena Marchetti in 2013 on the ethical duties of counsel to opposing parties in a case called Hargrove versus Ellis County. Blackwood and Associates, PLLC, dissolved during the trial. Sierra Park was not a witness at the trial. She had asked not to be. The prosecutors did not need her. Her 147 recordings had been transcribed and authenticated months earlier and entered as documentary evidence, with her recorded voice nowhere on them because they were recordings of other people. She sat in the gallery twice during the trial, on the second day and on the day the verdict was read. She does not regret it. She has said so, publicly, in one interview, with a small independent legal newsletter in this state, a year after the verdict. The interview is 2,000 words long. She does not mention Elena Marchetti by name. Elena Marchetti has not asked to be mentioned. Elena Marchetti has not asked anyone for anything. The last scene of this story that matters, and the one that Chloe Voss still tells her college roommate about 5 years later, in a dormitory at Columbia University where Chloe is a freshman enrolled in, of all improbable things, political science, takes place on a Saturday afternoon in late October, 14 months after the hearing. Elena Marchetti and her daughter were sitting on the small back porch of the small gray house on Laurel Street. The house was no longer just Sister Agnes's house. It was Elena's and Chloe's and Sister Agnes's house. Sister Agnes was inside, watching a baseball game on a 9-inch television, because Sister Agnes had been a Pirates fan since 1971. The espresso pot was on the stove. The door to the porch was open. A low sound of the game came through the screen. Chloe was doing homework. Elena was reading a brief. 3 weeks earlier, Elena Marchetti had been sworn in by the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court as a special prosecutor appointed by the State Attorney General for a set of cases that the office was calling, internally and without a public announcement, the Blackwood matters. The Blackwood matters were 29 divorce proceedings, heard in Ellis and 2 adjacent counties between 2018 and the present, in which Richard Blackwood had represented a male petitioner and in which the female respondent had walked away with less than 20% of the marital estate and without physical custody of any minor child. The cases had been flagged by the State Bar's Office of Professional Conduct during its review of Exhibit P-17. All 29 respondents had agreed to allow their cases to be reviewed. Not all of them had agreed to reopen, but enough had. 14 of them had. Elena was reading a brief on the 4th of the 14. She did not see her daughter watching her until Chloe said her name. Mom. Yes. I have a question, for school, for civics. Ask. What is the difference between a lawyer and a prosecutor? Elena set down the brief. She looked at her daughter in the low October light. The difference is who they work for. Okay, so who does a prosecutor work for? In theory, Elena said, the public. In practice, the state. In rare cases, both. Are you a prosecutor now? Are you, Yes, for these specific cases. Are you a judge? No, not right now. Will you be one again? Elena looked out at the small yard. The maple in the corner had turned red 3 weeks ago. The red had begun to brown. There were leaves all over the grass that someone would have to rake. Maybe, she said. Not soon. Why not soon? Elena considered her answer for a long time. A long time even for her. Because, she said finally, a judge is supposed to sit far away from the cases in front of her. I spent 11 years sitting too close to one. I need, for a while longer, to be on my feet. I need to walk into the rooms. I need to stand between the tables. I spent a long time being still. I am not ready to be still again. Chloe thought about that. Mom? Yes. Was it scary? Was what scary? Sitting at that table, that whole morning, before you stood up. Elena picked up her espresso cup from the small round table between them. She took a sip. She set it back down. Yes. Really. Really. You didn't look scared. I wasn't supposed to. I had spent 11 months making sure I wouldn't look scared. But I was. I was scared for 11 months. I was scared that morning in the elevator. I was scared in the hallway when he grabbed my arm. I was scared on the witness stand. I was scared driving to pick you up at school. What were you scared of? Elena thought. I was scared, she said, that I had waited too long. I was scared that in waiting, I had let you see too much of something I should never have let you see. I was scared that the person I had been before I married your father was gone. I was scared that I was going to stand up and that nothing would come out. I was scared that the briefcase would be empty. But the briefcase wasn't empty. The briefcase was full. Because you packed it. I packed it, slowly, over a long time, every week for 11 months. Why didn't you leave sooner? This was the question. This was the question Elena had known since the night she had made the first phone call to Alan Reyes in the Capitol that her daughter was eventually going to ask her. She had rehearsed 3 answers. None of them had been right. She had known none of them were right. She tried to tell the truth now. Because, she said, leaving a man like your father is not like leaving an apartment. It is like dismantling a building. If you pull the wrong beam first, the roof falls on the people you were trying to get out. I had you inside. I had his mother inside. I had the girlfriend inside, even though she did not know she was inside. I had 417 employees at his company inside. I had 3 women inside who he had done quieter, slower versions of this too, earlier in his life, and whom I met, quietly, over the course of the last 3 years, and each of whom told me the same story. I needed, before I pulled the beam, to get everyone I could reach out. Some of them I did not reach in time. Some of them I did. You are the one I was most afraid I would not reach in time. Chloe was quiet. Then she said, very small, You reached me in time, Mom. I know. Mom. Yes. Can I ask one more thing? One more thing. When you were reading all those things in court, the laws, the numbers, did you have them memorized? Elena laughed. It was the first real laugh Chloe had heard from her mother since before she had entered double digits. No. No? I had them in a folder. I wrote them out in longhand, on a legal pad, every morning for 11 months. I wrote each one of them at least 50 times. I did not memorize them. I practiced them. There is a difference. Memory fails. Practice is in your hands. I wanted them to be in my hands. Why did you practice them? Elena looked at her daughter in the low October light. Because, she said, I wanted to read them like a tide. I wanted them to sound like something I had been carrying for a long time and was tired of carrying, and was finally putting down. I wanted the man on the other side of the room to understand that I had been carrying them for longer than he had been pretending to love me. I wanted him to know, for the rest of his life, that he had been on my calendar for 11 months, not as a husband, as a file. Chloe nodded, slowly. Mom. Yes, baby. I want to be a prosecutor. Elena did not answer immediately. She looked at her daughter's gray eyes, which had become, in the last 14 months, much more her mother's eyes than her father's jaw. She reached out. She placed one hand on top of her daughter's hand. She squeezed. Once. She let go. We will talk about it in 5 years, she said, when you are ready to decide. For now, do your homework. Chloe smiled. It was a small, tired, pleased smile. She did her homework. Sister Agnes, in the living room, shouted at the television in Italian. Elena Marchetti picked up her brief. She kept reading. The stinger of this story, the thing that you should know, because you have come this far, and because I told you at the start that I would tell you the truth, and because the truth is rarely clean, is this. There is a folder in the back of Elena Marchetti's office at the State Attorney General's Special Prosecutor Unit that she has not yet opened. The folder was turned over to her 3 weeks ago, at her request, by the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District. It contains the names, redacted in part, of 4 individuals who received money over a 15-year period from one of James Voss's offshore accounts. The payments were not explained in the memos that accompanied the transfers. The individuals are, in descending order of total amount received, a sitting state senator in this state whose name begins with the letter H, a retired family court judge who sits on the board of directors of a large regional bank in the adjacent county. Not Judge Harrison, the other one. A woman who has never held elected or judicial office and whose name Elena does not yet recognize. The total paid to her over 15 years is $1,900,000. She lives in a small town 300 miles from Ellis. Her occupation is listed in the memo only as consultant. And one name that Elena has been told, by the United States Attorney directly, she should not open until she has had a full conversation with federal counsel present, because the fourth name, according to the United States Attorney, is a name that appears on the membership roll of a country club in this state and also appears on the federal bench. Elena has not opened the folder. She is not afraid to open the folder. She is waiting. She is waiting because Chloe is applying to college, and because Sister Agnes's health has been uncertain, and because the Blackwood matters are not yet resolved, and because a case of this kind, in her experience, is not a case that can be built in a month. A case of this kind is a case that is built in 11 months. In a house, with the children inside, slowly, one receipt at a time, quietly, while the man on the other side of the table assumes that nothing is being packed. She has, on her desk at the Attorney General's office, a new briefcase. It is brown leather, slightly scuffed, slightly larger than the old one. It is empty right now. She sets her coat on it, some evenings, when she is leaving late. She does not lock it yet. There is nothing inside to lock. But there is, at the very bottom of the top drawer of her desk, a small yellow legal pad. On the first page, in her own handwriting, in black ink, is a list of 5 numbers, each corresponding to a section of the United States Code. She writes them out in longhand every morning. She has written them out, so far, 41 times. The man whose name begins with the letter H, the sitting state senator, does not know this. Nobody in this state knows this except Elena Voss, a retired master sergeant named Thomas Reyes, who has been rehired as her chief investigator, a young attorney named Sierra Park, who has been promoted to deputy counsel on her unit, and the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, who calls once a month from an unlisted number to ask how her daughter is doing, and, at the end of each call, to ask, very quietly, the same 2-word question. How full? And Elena Marchetti, sitting in a small office in a gray stone building in the state capitol, looks at her new briefcase, and she answers, in her level voice, with the faintest smile that does not quite reach her eyes. Not yet. The lock clicks twice, then silence. End of Part 2. End of the story of Voss versus Voss. Not end of the story of Elena Marchetti. If you want to know who that sitting senator is, and whether the 4th name on that list is who you think it is, let me know in the comments. Some stories take 11 months to pack. This one is going to take longer.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.